In this video, I really want to talk about how to pick out the right rod for the lures that you are using. One of the most asked questions that I always get in regards to any type of like bass fishing video I've ever put out is like, what do you use with that lure? Or what rod, what's your setup? Like that is the number one thing that people ask. Now, when it comes to selecting what rod that you want to use for specific lures, to me, I keep things very, very simple. There are a few exceptions and we will talk about that, but I really keep things very simple. And in this video, we're going to talk all about that. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by my fishing apparel company, Fin Fishing. And right now over at Fin Fishing, everything is 20% off. Also, I'm doing a huge giveaway from now until the very end of the year. So for basically every dollar that is spent over at Fin Fishing, you get one entry into this giveaway, into this contest. I'm giving away 10 different prizes, including a $150 Arc Gravity 5 reel, a $50 glide bait, an over $2,000 Humminbird Solix 12 unit, and I'm giving away a fishing trip with myself. So I'm actually going to meet you on your home lake and do a lake break video, which I think would be really, really cool. So anyways, I'm going to leave some links down below in the description. Check them out. All right, let's talk a little bit about selecting the right rod. Now, real quick, before we talk about this, you've probably noticed a little bit of change in the scenery behind me. I don't usually let things get to me. I've been doing YouTube for a long, long time. I don't usually let comments get to me. I did have a comment come up the other day that got to me a little bit. And one guy was like, do you even fish tournaments? Do you even win any tournaments? Because I obviously put out a lot of information about fishing tournament or fishing, not just fishing in general and how to catch bass. And so the guy was basically questioning me and I let it get to me. So I decided to dig up just some random trophies that I had in a Rubbermaid container. I'm trying not to toot my own horn. This is not all of them. It's just some of the ones that were in this container on top. And so anyways, yes, I fish a lot of tournaments. I love it. And I know that that's very petty of me and I totally acknowledge that. And I'm probably not going to leave all these up. I wanted to show the one guy. So I'm sorry. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into selecting the right rod. Now, I've talked about this a little bit before on both this channel and the Bass Fishing HQ channel. But one of the biggest things when it comes to selecting the right rod that you really want to think about, there's kind of two main things, maybe three main things. And really, I want to talk about the lure weight. So the actual weight of the lure itself, what kind of hooks are on that lure, what the lure is made out of. Is it soft? Is it a hard bait? And the other thing is like, really the last thing, and I put it last because it's important, but it's not everything, but it's like how long of a cast you are going to make, how precise you have to be. Those are really the main components of understanding what the rod is. So let's first talk about the lure weight. Every rod out there, no matter what brand it is, usually has a power and an action. So when it comes to the power of a rod, you want to select a rod that kind of matches the weight of a lure. If you are using a very heavy lure, as far as lures goes, you might want to use a heavy power rod. If it's a very heavy lure, maybe you're throwing a giant glide bait, you might want to go with an extra heavy power rod. If you're using a really tiny bait, a little light finessey bait, that's when you might want to go with a light power rod, a medium light. And then you have a lot of lures that are kind of the normal that kind of fit in between. And that's where we use a lot of medium heavies, and heavies. So those are probably the most common, medium heavy, and heavy. So depending on how big your bait is and how much it weighs, that is how I'm going to select the power of that rod. Now, the next thing is the action of the rod. That is the other very, very important. I'm going to be really honest with you. I primarily use two actions when it comes to bass fishing in general. Two main actions for every single rod that I use. And that's going to be what you would call a moderate action or a fast action. Now, you have everything from slow actions to fast actions. And all this really tells you is where on the rod the tip is going to bend. An extra fast action rod means that really like the top basically 10% is, about 80, we'll say 80 or 90% of the rod is backbone. The top 10 or 20% actually has a little bit of bend. A fast action rod is really about 80, 75% of it is pretty stiff, a backbone, and the top 20-25% bends. If you have a moderate action, that basically as you get a slower and slower rod, you're going to have that rod bend further down the blank towards the butt. A very slow action rod means that when you set the hook on a fish, like that rod is a very parabolic bending rod that literally bends at the rod handle. As a matter of fact, I had some really old school rods back in the day that were very slow action rods. They were complete fiberglass rods. And when you would set the hook on a fish, if you had your drag locked down, it would bend so much at the handle that it actually popped my reel out of my reel seats. So that's why I don't really use a lot of really slow action rods. To me, moderate and fast are like probably cover 99% of all the bass fishing that I do. Now, how do you decide between a moderate action, which has a little bit more of that parabolic bend, and a fast action, which is a little bit stiffer with a little bit, the tip is really all that bends. And that really all comes down to the hooks that are on a bait. If I am using a bait that has a single hook on it, for example, a Texas rig, a jig, a spinnerbait, they all have one single hook on them, I'm going to use a fast action rod. If I'm using a bait that has treble hooks on it, I am going to use a moderate bending rod. For example, lipless crankbaits, deep diving crankbaits, topwater baits, anything that has treble hooks, I tend to use a moderate action. Now, there are some outliers. There are some, what's the word? I just said at the beginning of this, now I can't think of it. There are some, I don't know. There's a couple of things that break those rules. Now, the one lure that breaks the rule, probably in my opinion, is a bladed jig. A bladed jig is a single hooked bait. You can 100% get away with using a fast action rod with a bladed jig. I know a lot of guys that do it. I have found over the years that a bladed jig works best for me because a bladed jig, as you're bringing it through the water column, you're typically moving it very, very fast. When a bass goes to bite that bait, it creates negative pressure with its mouth. It's going to draw that bait in, and then you're going to hook it. I realized early on in my bladed jig fishing that when I use a fast action rod, I would feel that bait drawing into that fish a lot quicker than I did with a moderate action rod. And so therefore, you feel it quicker, you set the hook quicker, and I found that I would lose a fish every now and then. I'd have a lot of fish where I swung them in the boat and they came off in the boat, or they were just hooked right there in the tip of the mouth. As soon as I switched over to a moderate bending rod, that bait, that chatterbait, got way further down inside of that fish's mouth. And really all that it did is it allowed me as an angler to not feel that bait being drawn into that fish's mouth quite as fast. And so that is a bait that is an exception. That was the word that I was looking for. An exception to the rule. Another exception to the rule are baits that have treble hooks, but are soft baits. For example, we just talked about the Berkeley chop block in a video not too long ago. You also have baits like this. This one, you don't see the treble hook because I took it off of here, but you have a lot of baits like this, like a mag draft, that have a harness and they have a treble hook. If it is a soft bait with a treble hook, I am going to use a fast action. So that is probably the one time where I don't use a moderate action. But if you have a hard bait with a treble hook, I want a moderate action rod. And that includes baits like a giant glide bait, a hard plastic glide bait with treble hooks. Again, I think that there's a misconception. People think that you need to use a big, heavy, stout rod because you're using such a big bait. Yes, I want a very heavy power rod, maybe even an extra heavy power rod, but I still want that moderate action, because when you're using a bait that has treble hooks and it is a hard-bodied bait, they have a very easy time of throwing those baits, whether it is a crankbait, lipless, topwater, glide bait, anything that's treble hooks with a hard bait. A big spoon, same thing. A big flutter spoon is a treble hook bait, but it's a hard bait with a treble hook. Same exact thing. Those baits the bass can throw. The best way for you to not allow a bass to throw it is, one, Get down on your knees when you're reeling a fish in, put your rod in the water. Do not allow that fish to jump if all possible. That's the big thing that you can do. Also, using that moderate action. When a fish does breach the surface and he's shaking all over the place, that moderate action rod that bends further down the blank is going to help absorb a lot of that fish head shaking back and forth. That will keep that fish pegged a lot better. So when it comes to rods, that's really kind of my thing. I try to keep it very, very simple. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is the length of a rod. And this is what I talked about earlier, where I think it's probably the least important part, because you can get away with so many different lengths of rods. It really just depends on the situation that you are fishing, like the very specific situation. But the biggest thing that you should know about a rod is that the longer the rod is, typically the longer of a cast you are able to make with that rod. The shorter that rod is, the little bit more precise you can be with a cast. Now, again, this is why I say that this isn't super important, because you can be very precise with a 7-foot 6-inch rod, which is considered a longer rod when it comes to bass fishing. And you can also make pretty long casts with a 6-foot 9-inch rod, which would be considered a shorter rod in bass fishing. So that's why I say it's not super important, but you can help yourself a little bit. You can give yourself a 10% advantage by using a rod length that really fits the situation that you are fishing. For example, a bait like one of these mag draft style baits. This is not a mag draft. This is a devil swimmer. This is a bait that I like to throw in a lot of different situations. One of those situations is going to be in very open water, where I am making a very long cast, maybe over a rock flat, maybe over a grass flat, and I'm fishing this thing kind of like halfway in the water column. In that situation, I'm going to use the same power rod, like usually a medium heavy power rod, a fast action rod because it's a treble hooked with a soft bait. But I like, in that particular situation, a 7-foot 6-inch rod, a very long rod, because I can make very long casts. And when I set the hook at a distance with straight 15-pound fluorocarbon or 16-pound fluorocarbon, I'm going to be able to get a good hook because of the length of that rod. So in that specific situation, I really like a longer rod. Now, the other thing that I really like to do with this specific type of lure is fish it tight to cover. Fish it up underneath of a boat dock, or right up next to a stump, or a laydown, maybe in clear water. Now, when I'm trying to make very precise casts, again, same really kind of style of rod, medium heavy, and a fast action rod, but I like a shorter rod because I know that it's going to allow me to be more precise. I do not need that extra length to make a long cast. I do not need that extra length to set the hook at a distance. So in that specific situation, I may actually like a 6-foot 8-inch rod, a 6-foot 10-inch rod, something that's fairly short, because it's going to allow me to just be very precise when I'm tight to cover. So completely different rods as far as length goes, but the same rod as far as a medium heavy power and a fast action. So when it comes to bass fishing, that is why at times you will get anglers that tell you all kinds of different things when it comes to a rod, because that angler may fish it a very certain way. They may fish a certain bait in a very certain way, but you can really kind of cater your tackle to fit the specific need that you're fishing. Now, the one last thing that I really want to talk about here that I just thought about is that if you are hooking up with fish and you are landing fish and you are not losing fish and you feel like you're doing a great job, even if what I just said is different than what you are using, then just stick to you, because there's also a few other factors that go into this, including a hook set, the way that you fight a fish, and the line that we use. You know, monofilament fluorocarbons, they have a little bit more stretch to them, especially mono. Mono floats, fluorocarbon sinks. Braided line has 0 stretch. You also may be using a braid to fluorocarbon. So all of those specific lines that you use can impact the rod that you're using as well. And so for that reason, if you are hooking up with fish and landing fish, that's all that you really need to know. If you're losing fish, this is when taking kind of the simplistic look at, like I do, to it may really, really help you. So anyways, guys, Hope that you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to check out that fin fishing gear. I'll leave it linked here, up, down, all over the place for you guys. And I will see you guys in the next one.